Hello, everyone. This is author Debra Jayne East with Skywatcher Radio Show, and I am very happy to have a special guest on my show this evening, and I'm so excited about having Eve Lorgen on my show. I have been a fan of hers for a while, and when I had James Bartley on my show a while back, he told me that Eve was a wonderful researcher and that she knew as much about the subject of reptilians and alien abductions as he did, and she was a wonderful person. So I was just really thrilled when she accepted my request to be on my show. So first I would like to tell all my audience a little bit about her. So I want to read her bio to you. Eve Lorgen, author of The Love Bite, Alien Interference of Human Love, Relationships. This is published by Logos and HHC in 2000, and The Dark Side of Cupid, Love Affairs, The Supernatural and Energy Vampirism, Keyhole Publishing, 2012. And that is her current book that has just been, her last book that has been released. And she is a 20-plus year researcher and hypnotherapist in anomalous trauma. This spectrum includes alien ET encounters, paranormal experiences, MyLabs, and other dimensional visitations. The focus of her two books reveals taboo aspects of how love relationships have been orchestrated, interfered with, or disrupted by paranormal sources. Eve also holds a BS in biochemistry as well as a master's degree in counseling psychology. Her scientific and intuitive skills have contributed to her success in understanding these otherworldly experiences. While research is important, her priority is in support, healing, and empowered sovereignty for her clients. Her inspiration into the anomalous started early in life with her own paranormal experiences. Her inspiration came through the work of the late Dr. Carla Turner, who was wonderful, by the way, and the UFO and alien abduction researcher Barbara Bartholic. Eve is presented at many UFO, paranormal, conspiracy, spirituality venues since 1998, authored numerous articles internationally, translated in several languages. She has recently appeared on Destination America's Monsters and Mysteries on an episode featuring alien abductions, implants, and the alien matrix. She is a frequent guest on alternative radio talk shows and will appear on the People's Voice TV in the fall for an engaging and revealing interview. What a wonderful bio you have. You are such a busy person. Tell me, how are you doing this evening, Eve?
I'm doing good. I'm glad it's Friday. Well, Friday night anyway, so that's good.
I am too. It seems like it gets here just all too fast, and you blink your eyes and it's the weekend coming up, and then you have as much to do on the weekend as you do through Monday through Friday. So I really appreciate you agreeing to be on the show, and I guess the first thing that we'll start out with is your earliest memory of paranormal events, and I'm just going to let you run with it. We want to know all about your work, your books, and all the many fascinating things about what you do.
Oh, well, I usually don't start off with my own experiences. I'm a little shy about that, but I'll just give one. Actually, the first one that I remembered, and I was told that I was 9 months old at the time, but it was actually a out-of-the-body experience of watching my sisters in the backyard getting into something, and they were trying to get into ant poison stakes, and I was trying to warn them to not eat the ant poison or not to play with it because I knew it was poison. And I don't know how I knew that, but they ended up eating it anyway and had to go to the hospital. So when I told my mom that, she said, well, that wasn't possible. You couldn't even walk then. How could you be seeing them? And I must have been out of the body taking a nap and, watching over my sisters. So
wow.
I really remember that quite clearly and thinking like an adult even as an infant. So it was interesting.
Well, I have 5 sisters, and I'm the oldest, so I make 6. And, you tend to remember things that involve your siblings. So yeah. I appreciate you sharing that with us.
I'm very close with my sisters, yes.
Oh, yeah, that's wonderful. Sisters are a very special thing.
Yeah.
Well, what what really got you started in your career with things that go bump in the night like aliens? Because, you know, a lot of times there's some really scary stuff about aliens. What really got you interested in talking about this and doing research?
Probably, well, my own experiences of unusual phenomena, including the alien UFO ET kind of thing, happened in my life. Although I didn't fully understand what was happening until really adulthood, until actually after I read some of Bud Hopkins and Jacques Vallée's work, actually. And then when I read, actually it was Bud Hopkins' book, I think it was Taken, or the one before that, Missing Time, I think that was the one. And that helped me realize, wait a minute, I'd had those kinds of experiences, but I thought they were dreams. But they had happened through my whole childhood and even adult years until a certain point of time, and they actually stopped. So I did a lot of studying and got more and more interested in wanting to uncover my own memories, although that was pretty difficult. I ended up just getting a degree in biochem first, and then was disenchanted in that field until I ended up going for counseling psychology, because I wanted to learn more about people with different experiences and to explore the anomalous trauma aspect, which is really more of the alien abduction syndrome, although it included more. And so really when I started doing that research and having a support group with people who've had anomalous experiences, it actually spanned a gap of many different kinds of experiences, but mostly it was alien abductions, what I call the MILAB experience, as well as all kinds of paranormal things, which are usually linked in with those kinds of experiences. It just happens that way. It's as if people who have those experiences as children or they grow up, their perception opens up to that realm as well, and they just have more paranormal experiences. So that was really an eye-opener for me. And really who inspired me a lot was Dr. Carla Turner and also Barbara Bartholic, as well as Jacques Vallée, who Barbara Bartholic actually worked with in her early career. So she did a lot of hypnotherapy with abductees and actually clued us in, including myself and James Bartley, because we actually did the group together in San Diego County I guess it was in the mid-90s. So we got to communicating with Barbara Bartholic after Dr. Carla Turner's death. And it was Barbara's knowledge of what happens within not only the abduction scenario that she learned through hypnotic regressions and interviews with hundreds of people, but also the little things that wasn't really in the published literature at the time, and things that were considered more taboo, including what she called the drama of the love obsession, which was something that these alien handlers were actually putting people together in these connections and, doing these emotional highs, crashing lows, and all kinds of different forms of experimentation for what she felt was more than a purpose of just genetic hybridization. It was obviously something more, which we actually thought had to do with a type of energy vampirism or emotional harvesting. But it's actually the sexual energy, I think, that is a big part of that. And that's probably what my second book goes into more in terms of the dynamics of how you can identify and experience the psychic and energy vampirism aspect in relationships, where they're being interfered with. So that's that in a nutshell.
Wow. Well, that's a lot of serious research, and I found out recently that there are still a lot of people that don't really know about military abductions or about reptilians. And when you mention these kinds of things to them, they will, well, recently I had someone unfriend me from a group because they said, military abductions, really? I don't believe that. And they will unfriend you because they think it's so out of the box.
Wow.
So, do you ever have that experience? Do people think, wow, that's just too far out there?
Yeah, usually it's the alien part that they're more afraid of, and I think it really comes down to cognitive dissonance, because there's a real fear of the unknown, and really the consensus reality and mass consciousness is so mind controlled to have a limited perception of what reality is. They pretty much fall into the bell curve of lack of awareness, and that lack of awareness, could be very fearful if something different comes into the picture that they become challenged and fearful, and the cognitive dissonance comes up, the defenses go up, and then they defriend you. But it's really not your fault.
Right.
It's really a matter of once you get to know and understand what's happening, and you talk to enough people, and you have your own perceptions, you realize that the mass consciousness is actually quite diluted, in my view.
Well, let's talk about the reptilians. There are a lot of things they can do for interference, with humans. And I know that your first book, I think, addresses some things in that realm. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how that is manifested in what you do?
Well, I really think it helped in my understanding of the overall phenomena. And I have to give my gratitude towards Barbara Bartholic and Carla Turner, as well as my colleague James Bartley and the other people that I learned from directly, including people from Southern California and others across the country who had reptilian encounters, as well as the MILAB experience. They often went together, but not always. And what I discovered, too, is that the reptilians seem to be higher on the hierarchy compared to some of the grays from their reports, that if they weren't able to be abducted by the grays, or if they were able to resist the gray abduction, then the reptilians would come in and take them and use more force. And that had happened in a couple of cases that were reported. So that became pretty prevalent, that this reptilian thing kept happening over and over again, especially with the MILABs. So they seem to be working in liaison with some, black op military groups where, maybe the reptilians offered them technology in exchange for a cooperative military agenda where, let's say the reptilians and whoever's hierarchy they're under would have one agenda or need for humans, and then the human military would have their own needs, and they would work together so that they could cooperate on a joint plan. But in my view, it seemed like the reptilians had the upper hand in terms of deception, of getting the military and the humans involved in a type of Faustian bargain where they're using humans as pawns and not even knowing that they were being manipulated, But I think they know now. It's just that when you make pacts with these beings, it just gets into a big mess. And I think that's what a lot of the government factions have done. And some people may not be in agreement with all that. And there's a lot of alliances and different factions and compartmentalized aspects, even within the military and government. I mean, there's people fighting against each other and keeping secrets from each other, and who don't agree with this group and that group. And there apparently is a lot of different ET groups as well.
Well, there are. I've heard that there is anywhere from 30 to 60, and I've even heard more than that, different kinds of aliens. I mean, it's not just, most people are familiar with the grays,
Yeah.
But there's reptilians, the Pleiadians. I mean, there's a huge list. Would you say that reptilians are probably one of the more aggressive type of extraterrestrials?
Well, they definitely have aggressive behaviors. I don't know if they're the most aggressive. There's others that I think are worse, like the Dracos.
Yes.
And, it depends on the ones interacted with, but they seem to be the ones that have the more the bad reputation, so to speak, in terms of, bad behaviors and aggression and violence and sexual violence, control.
Yes, I think I would agree with you on that. And most people don't really understand the role of the grays with reptilians. Could you explain a little bit about that, from your viewpoint, so that people can get a better understanding about how the grays and reptilians really work with each other?
Well, it seems to me that there's different factions of grays also. There's like the robotic EBEs, which are just the small workers that may carry out the physical abductions under orders of a higher one. And so I think some are in alliance and some are in disagreement with reptilians. But by and large, it seems like the grays are the ones who carry out the more physical activities and the ones who are more visible with respect to the phenomenon. But underneath, I think there's a hierarchy of control, which goes into what I call the incorporeal aliens, or the ones who really don't have physical bodies. And that's something that Dr. Malanga actually clarified in his research. And he's from Italy and has done actually a lot of really good research. And what I liked about his research is that he really identified the what I call the alien parasitism aspect, and the aspect of how they're causing a disconnect with different parts of our being so they could feed off of our energy and actually control us or live through us. So there is a hierarchy, and then there's physical beings, and then there's non-physical beings in terms of aliens that interact on a lot of different levels, as well as programming, like the mind control programming.
Right. It's really more complicated than people think. And you mentioned something about, the government and the different factions that make agreements with reptilians and all that kind of stuff. Most people just have no concept that could even happen.
Yeah.
Why do you think that that has been kept so secret, from our societies? I mean, that's one thing they do, I think, is they hide a lot of this stuff because I guess they're afraid of mass hysteria or something. But do you think there's other reasons why the government wants to keep these kinds of associations with the reptilians and other ET races so secretive? I mean, what's in it? What's in it for the government? What's your idea about that?
Well, I still think it's a Faustian bargain of sorts, that they've made alliances with certain beings that they maybe believed would help them in their military and their technology and their different agendas, but they realized that it was a deeper can of worms than maybe they had thought, and there might be a necessity for some secrecy because some of the things are so awful that are being done. I don't think people could accept that, and then they would get really, really angry at the government. And I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of people who can't handle it already. You just look at the reactions we get from people who just can't handle that possibility.
Exactly.
So I just think they have a lot to hide as well, and some of it is security, like military security, and from other beings, not necessarily humans. So there's a lot of different reasons for secrecy. Actually, it's not that I'm condoning it at all either. It's just it's a bigger thing than you can imagine. As you research more and more, it's not a real simple thing. It becomes more complex. And actually, I've learned from people who are in these, we can call them super soldier programs, although they're probably not named that officially. Like the man that I interviewed named Randy Kramer, who was on the Mars Defense Force. And he did a couple interviews written with me and also audio, and he's done several with other researchers. Like I think he did a recent one with Carrie Cassidy, and he did one with Alfred Weber. But basically the people who have been in these secret projects, they're working to defend like a base on Mars, for example, where they're defending against reptilians and insectoids and sometimes Dracos that seem to be frequenting those areas of our solar system. So they basically admit that these beings are actually physical, and they're defending in a physical way on Mars, or even on Earth in some cases. So,
gosh, that is really incredible. Just to hear that, and I research as well. Besides doing my radio show, and I tell you, until you have met some of these people who have experienced abductions and have people that have talked to reptilians, the world just has no idea how knowing this information affects their life, and how a lot of times they're really devastated. And
yeah,
it's a real thing. And when you research it and you talk to people, you have a whole different viewpoint than, say, for instance, you just read an article somewhere or a few paragraphs about a person. It's really a totally different thing.
That's true, and I think that's something that was, a benefit of working with people in person, and many who actually chose to keep confidential testimonies and, hypnotherapy sessions. And there's so much more that goes on privately than that's in the published community, although now there's so much more out there through a lot of audio interviews and whistleblowers. But really, this is something that James Bartley had found, and basically the gatekeeping effect in the published and what's in the media really is a gatekeeping kind of effect to water it down or to define it in a certain way so that you have a certain spin control of what the phenomenon is. But when you talk to people and, you get to know enough people who've had experiences, it's much more diverse. And, I just think there's a big mind control and manipulation going on with humanity from a higher level hierarchy of beings who are non-human, and it's pretty
Yes.
clear.
Yes, I mean, I'll agree with you. I mean, it's not just what people call the secret government. I think there are other, like you said, non-human entities that have a big stake in a lot of this. So it's really, like you said, more complex than people really understand. But I agree with all your points about um, why things are kept secret. There's a lot of different reasons, just like you spoke about, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's mind-boggling. But I would love for you to talk a little bit about the reptilians and love relationships and all the things that you discovered through talking with people. Uh, this, when we spoke yesterday, I think it was, I mean, there are some really incredible aspects that a lot of people are not aware of, and I would love for you to talk about some of those things.
That's a large one. I mean, I could use the examples of some of the people that I interviewed who were in my first book. Let's say a MILAB female who had military abductions as well as those with grays and reptilians. And she might have seen other beings along the way, because sometimes you see a variety within a whole bunch of experiences. But this particular one tended to have a reptilian handler of sorts that would frequently visit her, for example, and not only physically but also interdimensionally. And then they would do a lot of sexual, rape, basically, but also Kundalini sexual arousal to amplify her energy field, so that then right after let's say the reptilian liaison, then the military would come and use her on, psychic remote viewing ops kind of thing. Or, I mean, it would be a number of different things that could happen, but the reptilians tended to have definitely a more sexual, aggressive tendency to interact with humans, and quite mean, actually, depending on the person's report. So some people look at them, with less negativity or fear, or maybe look at them as being their protectors and sometimes seeing in a different light. But the most of the reports I get are from the more frightening, negative, or the hosting phenomena. So, they're primarily, aggressive and controlling, and definitely are vampiristic, to put it mildly.
Yeah, explain that term, because a lot of people don't really understand that. They associate it with, vampires that bite each other on the neck. But in relation to what you're speaking about, it's something sort of different.
Yeah, well, it's usually they have a great desire for the delicacy of sometimes human blood and flesh, but mostly sexual energy and emotional energy. So they could feed off that frequency, sometimes energetically or physically, but it's mostly sexual Kundalini energy that they could somehow activate that in people by activating their chakras or interfering with their energy field. And they can do this sexually, so they have a penchant for being able to do that, but accessing directly, the energy field of the person. And then they can do this through others who act as hosts for them, or as, they're hosts for these entities, and then they have a energy vampire kind of effect. So that's what actually my second book was more about, in terms of what people are reporting and how they perceive that. So in the UFO phenomena, you have people who perceive, direct physical encounters or abductions with reptilians, or sometimes reptilians in the military environment where they're actually training them. So, like, I've had people talk about how they were taken in these MILAB ops where they were literally with reptilians in military uniforms, and the reptilians were basically in control and training these human MILABs. Or they put them through a variety of training experiences, which may be military combat, but not necessarily. And then I've had other MILABs report, let's say, that they had a reptilian handler that was actually a protector that would protect her from other beings or other conflicting military or humans. So there's different ways in which they're reported, but they do like to protect people in terms of they have a very militaristic kind of mode of being. So they can be used as protectors, but they could also be used as handlers. So there's so much that I hear. I mean, in terms of even within one person's experience, she actually saw that there were fake reptilians and fake aliens within a MILAB experience. So, but I don't think that's always the case, like in a either or situation, but that can be utilized also. So you just have to keep that in mind, that there's a lot of mind control going on, a lot of these experiences, and that people come out of it with their perception of what's happening, and that could be a screen memory. But the people who are more aware tend to be the more psychic ones, and so those are the good people to interview, the ones who really have a greater clarity with respect to their own perception and have done a lot of their own healing work, which is why I've done a lot of interviews with people who've done more extensive healing than, let's say, the standard abductee or contactee wants to go out and just talk about their experiences but haven't done extensive healing and recovery. Because I think that's really important, because just what Barbara Bartholick had discovered is that there was often layers of screen memories in someone's experience, where they may remember one thing and they thought it was good, but they still have this hidden trauma that's kind of incongruent with what they're claiming that they remember, and then going deeper hypnotherapeutically and finding that there was another kind of experience altogether. So you really have to go underneath and really do the healing and recovery work and really be honest with whatever's present, because I think people want to believe certain things that are not necessarily true in order to basically cover up the deep trauma of maybe something worse or something more scary.
Well, that is just really fascinating, because, I myself have spoke to people who have been abducted, and also to people that reported to me that they were raped, sexually used by reptilians. So let's talk about, I guess, what you would term as the hybrids, which would be a reptilian that mates with a human abductee, and either if it's a man, you hear that they, take sperm, or if it's a woman, they take her eggs, or she actually sometimes is pregnant and then they take the fetus. What is the purpose of them making hybrids with humans? What is their objective?
Yeah, that's a good question, because there's different forms of hybrids and genetic alteration. I was just going to say, I remember at least 2 cases of women who claimed that they actually, one of them aborted a half-human, half-reptilian creature. And actually there's an Italian woman who's been on record where they actually removed it, and it's shown, there's like photographs of this reptilian frog-like baby that came out of her after several months gestation. But there's somebody that I know personally who had, let's say, an abortion, not an abortion, but a miscarriage, and that was like a half reptilian, half human, and she basically flushed it down the toilet. It was almost like a programmed behavior. And then there was another woman I met actually in Philadelphia years ago who claimed that she actually gave birth to a half human, half reptilian one that probably looked more reptilian, but it was in a military hospital, and they actually took it away from her and they wouldn't even let her see it. And she never reported this to anyone because she was so afraid. But things like that do happen. But those are the more severe cases. But I think that there's different ways that you can have hybrids, and you can have like a chimera type, or you can have genetic recombinations where they, put in certain genes and it's not a true hybrid situation. Or there's what we call the moonchild kind of thing, where you have a reptilian that's either overshadowing a human or completely hosting a human, and then that human has sex with a woman who conceives the child, the moonchild, that has that spirit in it. And so that spirit in it may affect its genetic expression to be more reptilian in nature, but still look human. So there's different kinds of hybrids, I think, that are going on, and different characteristics. But something that Malanga found was that the parasitism aspect of alien parasites within our mind and body was actually can create things that appear hybrid but may not be a true hybrid situation. So I'm thinking that, it may not really be scientifically true to call it a true hybrid. You really don't know until you test it scientifically. That's what I think.
Well,
so I think that the overshadowing business, or the parasitism, or the partial possession kind of thing, can create effects in someone that make them appear or think they're hybrid, but what they're really doing is just basically carrying an entity within them that's parasited to them. And then that, in effect, could potentially cause a genetic expression of, let's say, genes that are inside them that once they're hosted or have the energy field of that parasite, it causes those genes to express even more in their genetic expression, even later in life.
That is fascinating.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
is fascinating.
One guy, he claimed that he has a lot of reptilian DNA and claimed that he had a lot of unusual skin conditions and heightened sense of smell, heightened sensitivities, heightened aggression. And he noticed this happening actually after an abduction where he was given some kind of injection. And then it happened after the injection, he started noticing these physiological changes. So there's different kinds of reports where, they're suspecting that there's genetic alteration going on, even after being given like a vaccine kind of thing.
Wow. Well, you mentioned that there could be scientific ways that you could determine if someone was reptilian. What kind of things would they do to find out if possibly you are a hybrid or have a reptilian DNA? How would you find out?
Well, I mean, you'd have to have a standard, right? You'd have to have the standard genome of what reptilian is to test it against, obviously, in order to, see where the genes are. But I think that there's genetic markers that show up not only with respect to the DNA codes and codons and how they come out on a DNA, what do you call it, northern blot, or what do you call that, DNA gel, but really in express characteristics. And I think that you hear a lot about in let's say, some of the bloodline families or the things. There's online forums, for example, where there's people who talk about Rh negative characteristics and where that came from and where they believe that came from. And some people think it actually came from the Dracos instead of the reptilians, but they think it might be a reptilian trait. And then there's different characteristics that these people have. And so there's a lot of discussion of that, like, heightened psychic ability, blue-green eyes, red hair, freckles, the cauda, extra cauda is what they call it. And then the extra vertebrae, and there's different things that people will report. And larger eyes and extra sensitivity in their hearing and their smelling, sometimes extra teeth, and there's all kinds of things. Sometimes the long fingernails. I've heard one person, this was a wild one. Actually, I heard it from two people who had reptilian host, like those awful predator psychic vampire type like lovers, and that this particular one actually had like claw-like toenails, and it wasn't some like fungal infection or anything. It was like truly like a weird trait, okay? So the webbed fingers and toes could be part of that too. And there's another trait that someone told me about that I thought was really interesting, and I've only seen it in two people. And I'm not saying that that's reptilian. I really don't think so. I think there's a lot of different kinds of races and genetic variations that are going on. But I just, off the top of my head, I just felt like sharing this. It was a trait that someone told me about that had to do with their hand, and that the thumb position on the hand is actually lower in those who have this particular trait. So you'd only know it if you knew what you were looking for, actually. And I've only seen this on two different people, and who are definitely abductees who have different characteristics that definitely stand out outside the norm, but only if you would know from talking with them and hearing about their life, kind of thing. So
that is
things, and I really think that the military know what these markers are, and there's people probably within the medical establishment, and I don't know, probably some secret groups who actually know what these markers are. And this is something that Michael Relf discussed years ago in my interview with him, and he's somebody who was on one of the Mars Defense Force projects and one of these secret super soldier projects where he was age regressed and sent to Mars and all that. And he said he believed that the military probably have markers to tell, okay, if somebody would be a good candidate for one of their programs. And one of the markers that he thought was significant had to do with something they're able to recognize that would denote that you have the ability to interdimensionally travel more easily without as much maybe harm to your physical body or your energy body, or that you have more capability of going in and out of portals or interdimensional travel.
That is interesting. I haven't heard that, but one of the things I did hear was that the military really liked to be in contact with humans that had been abducted by reptilians because they had heightened psychic ability. Have you heard that?
Totally. Yeah, that's totally true. More than that, I mean, they have heightened abilities in general, and that could be a genetic thing also. I mean, this is something that one of my MILAB people talked about in her interview. Her name was Marit, and I interviewed her 3 times, and she talked about some of her sensitivities and psychic abilities and what she felt was a Draco origin, actually, or a trait. But the military are always wanting to use these people and actually even try to recruit them. They may know like who you are. Let's say if they know you're a contactee or abductee, then they'll try to recruit you for their projects, and sometimes they'll be really nasty about it. I mean, I had a friend who they tried to seek her out as well as some others at a it was like a UFO conference way back in the early 90s where it was run by people that are, let's say, well-known, claiming to be researchers who are really what I call insider agents trying to recruit people for black op projects and, psychically remote viewing them and attacking them and trying to get them to agree to be in their projects as remote viewers because these abductees by nature were basically much better at it, and they always were trying to recruit them for their projects. So that kind of happens too. Yeah, not only are they abductees who might be used, but there's other agencies who somehow find out who they are, then they try to, recruit them, but sometimes by force.
Gosh, that's really terrible. It's almost like when they find out these people who, through no fault of their own, were abducted or used, and they trade them around to use them. So that's really terrible.
Yeah, and plus they'll want to know what group is taking them because I think the military knows by now there's many different groups who are basically have an eye on or they try to take, I don't want to say possession of, but make claims on certain bloodlines. And so certain ET groups may interact with certain people. And so I think the military have a way of trying to monitor who's being taken if they can, and then try to find out about, who these people are and what groups are taking them, what they're doing. And then they may come back and interrogate them like what's reported in some of the MILABs where they're first taken by an ET group and then later the military comes and interrogates them about who they were interacting with. And then it could be, another ET group fighting over someone else's group, and there's like skirmishes going on. So I've talked to people who have that kind of thing going on too. So there's definitely different groups,
Well, that's some of the things that I have heard as well. And it's really for the people that have had to endure this, nobody has any idea how great their losses are because a lot of people, they have to live in fear or they never really reach their full potential because they're afraid of repercussions or or the military is giving them a really hard time and just so many different things. It's really just devastating.
It is.
To people.
The secrecy causes a lot of problems in terms of, even what kind of family you're growing up in. If you're an abductee and, you were put in a project and then you got to keep it secret. And then if you talk, you basically get punished or tortured. And so, it sets up a whole double bind, not being able to tell the truth and then not being able to get the support for the healing you need because you have to keep all these secrets. And then once you tell, you're in danger. So depending on, what that's considered a security risk for some other agency that's been using you or whatever, it's really awful. And these people do suffer. They suffer a lot. And sometimes they suffer at the hands of their own people, like other abductees hurting other abductees, or what I call the gatekeepers, who are sent in to basically keep an eye on what's going on so that certain people don't say too much. Or, well, this is one of the whole things with a love bite. Was what we discovered early on was that there was a type of disruption element, like let's say a certain MILAB or abductee was coming to the knowledge and awareness of their true experiences and wanting to discover and share that, especially if it was a military thing. And then once they did that, they would be sent in some programmer or a handler, or usually through a lover, or what James would call a Romeo agent, but it would be like a love bite setup. And then that person might act as a disruption or a controller or a handler in that person's case. And sometimes they're even a sleeper operative. So there was different ways in which this could happen. But a lot of times, the love bite would throw them off for years. And they didn't know until years later, how this thing affected them and its whole effect on their whole healing journey. So that does happen, unfortunately.
And, it's a really sad thing because a lot of times when this occurs, who do you go when you need help? When you recognize that this is possibly going on, who can you trust and who do you go to? So I imagine the what you offer these people has to be sometimes just a lifeline to them and all they've had to go through.
Definitely. And there's a lot of trust issues as well. I mean, people especially the MILABs, they have a lot of trust issues, and it's just totally understandable because many of them have been lied to, or people send in agents on them all the time, or it's hard for them to trust even, people in the field, because you always wonder, oh no, is this person an agent, and how are they being used, and are they under mind control, and what entity is working through them? And so the question is, how much healing and recovery work has the person done? And really, you have to look at that. That is a security issue. It's a big security issue.
Yes, and also you mentioned something about people with Rh negative blood types. If you spoke with a person and they said, well, I do have Rh negative blood, or perhaps they say, well, I had a parent that was Rh negative, or somebody in their family, close family that was Rh negative. That doesn't necessarily mean that they might be a hybrid or have a reptilian, DNA or anything, does it? Or
not necessarily. Mm-mm.
So I think sometimes
they're more
you would have to have the other characteristics that you mentioned, and then that person should, if they suspect that they might be, and they have the characteristics like psychic, more psychically attuned and
psychically in tuned, because I guess there's a lot of different traits. One of the whole blood thing, especially the O negative would be the universal donor. So a lot of times they may want to experiment on that blood type because they have less rejection issues with their genetic experimentations and the hybrid studies. That's one of the reasons too. So yeah, there's different characteristics though, and I wouldn't say that they're all like bad, like if you had those abilities, it doesn't mean that you're hosted by a reptilian or anything, it could be just what's expressed in your genetics. So.
And, reptilians, I've heard that they really have high IQs and, they're not dumb by any means.
No, not at all. Yeah, they're very smart.
Yeah, because, they're very smart. And would you say that perhaps some of the people who are true hybrids with reptilians, are they usually people of higher intelligence? Is that possibly maybe a characteristic?
Well, definitely. I just think they are more intelligent, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're more ethical. And, some of the ones that have been described by people, they sound like psychopaths, actually. Like in some of James' interviews where he interviewed a couple of abductees who had encounters with the hybrids that had the more psychopathic characteristics. And that was pretty scary in terms of the kind of behaviors that were observed. And I know there was I guess it was an interview with a woman named Karen, and then there was another man that he interviewed where he talked about the hybrids. But the hybrids that he talked about were the more psychopathic ones that he claimed were reptilian hybrids. So there's different kinds being reported. So they're not all the same, So.
Yeah, that's, when you talk to abductees, many times they will look you dead serious in the eye and they're frightened. Or, if it's women, they're grieving if they've, lost a fetus, if they've had a miscarriage, or they feel like, when they were abducted that, they were violated. They're, between the men and the women, they're both suffering, some different aspects of what has happened to them. How do you deal with a woman that's had to, who has lost a child, or she has had a child that she thinks, possibly could be from where she was sexually attacked by a reptilian during abduction.
That happens. It's just, you always wonder. It's an awful thing to always wonder, whether or not you're not even the child of your parents, or that your child is a genetic, mutation or a genetic experiment of the abductions. That is something awful, because you never really know. And you just have to love them just like you would love your own children, and try not to get that in the way. But I think there is a grieving process of having lost a child and knowing that you have, let's say, hybrid children in another reality. And I think the aliens use our emotional attachments against us in many ways to take the energy, or to help promote their agenda. And, it's really hard. Like I say, it's really hard.
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree with you. It has to be very difficult. And what can men and women that fear they have been abducted, what can they do to protect themselves? What can they do to stop these kinds of things from happening?
Well, I think the best way to do that would be the healing and recovery of clearing the traumas, and then connecting with their highest essence, which in Malanga's work, he actually has a method for connecting what he calls the mind, spirit, soul triad for an integrated consciousness. And once that takes place, and the removal of the alien parasite or the implants are cleared out, then it actually closes the window so they cannot access you as much or at all if you keep up that integrated consciousness. And all that really implies, which is a constant healing and recovery, and working on yourself to, better boundaries and sovereignty. But really, some people are just taken more than others, and they could do so much work, and they're still taken because they're of genetic interest. So I'm not going to say it's 100%, because there's still people who are taken. So it's just really to be able to get emotional support for this, and to know they're not crazy, and to be treated with respect just like anybody else, and to really know how to get that kind of support so that the trauma and the isolation doesn't cause more harm. Because it's really the trauma and the isolation and the secrecy that really does a lot of damage, as well as the mind control programming that goes on behind the scenes, So.
Yes, and, I think, too, that there are people in the government in the past that are, have passed away, and even people of today that know about this stuff, and they don't like it. They don't want it to happen, but because of secrecy issues and fear of them getting persecuted, put in prison, or even being killed,
Yeah.
they can't say anything. So that has to be frustrating, to those people as well.
Yeah.
So what kind of information can you give to someone who is knows they're being abducted by the military, and they want to try to put a stop to it? Is there anything they can do? I mean, we've talked about some things, for healing and everything, but what can you do if it's the government? Is there any hope for these people? I hear so many complaints about the military abductions. I mean, it's staggering.
Yeah, it's not pleasant. But I think that there are people who have curbed the interactions that they're having through really working on personal sovereignty and healing and recovery and getting their needs met in that way. But there's not always a 100% guarantee. And sometimes people choose to stay in the program because of whatever reason. Like in the Randy Kramer case, he's actually chose to stay in the program because his commanding officer and a small alliance actually seemed to have better intentions against something that they didn't agree with on other levels. So there's different levels of what's going on and different kind of agendas. So, but I still think the healing and recovery and the support with other survivors is really the best thing that they can do. I don't know if there's anything legally you can do, to be honest. I mean, are you kidding? The legal system? It's like they're not even going on. They're so manipulated. It's like, who can you trust? You get to this point where you realize how high the technology is, how good the mind control is, who's controlling who on these higher levels. And so you have to assess that. And can you basically deal with that level of control and power. And so that's why I think spiritual methods and healing and recovery methods are really important. Things like Malanga's methods, for example, good old-fashioned counseling and support, but also things like holographic kinetics, where you combine a trauma resolution along with a kind of spirit releasement kind of thing, and you work on a holographic level where you connect with eternal spirit. And then that's where you have to connect with your true power. And that's really a better way of dealing with it, in my opinion.
Well, what would you suggest for people when they come to terms with what has happened to them and they realize that yes, they have been abducted, they have been used by the military, by the reptilians? Should they come out in public and talk about it? Should they a lot of times if you keep something secret and in the darkness, it has power to hurt you. But if you bring it out to the light and you talk with people and you're able to, sometimes to put it behind you, should they do that or should they keep it secret? I mean, what do you recommend to these people?
Well, I would think in retrospect, after observing people, like sometimes people realize it, and then when they break programming and then they realize they're in a program, sometimes their first reaction is to want to tell the whole world, and they're enraged and want to, get even with the evil handlers or whatever it is. And that's not a good approach, because really you have to do enough recovery to be able to strategize on the best possible scenario. Sometimes it's better to go public after a while, because then, once you're public, they can't do as much. But it really depends on the situation. But I still think doing enough healing to not be so reactive in terms of rage and wanting to get even, because I've seen people do this who didn't have a handle on their healing, and they didn't integrate all their alters and really deal with the rage, and it just got them into trouble. So I would say do enough healing and recovery to get balanced and neutral enough to be able to have a strategy and to have support first before going public.
Well, I think that's really great advice, and I hope all the listeners that are out there that have these kinds of problems will, try to seek help. And I have just a couple of more questions, and then I'll let you give your web address and how to get in contact with you. You have worked with some really great people. You mentioned Bud Hopkins, Carla Turner, and of course, James Bartley, and many others. Are y'all working on any kind of projects? Are you planning on writing any more books? Or, I mean, do you guys all, keep in contact with each other and keep each other updated, or have special things you're doing?
Well, I have things I'm working on, probably maybe 2 book projects, but one for sure, with somebody who's had just such phenomenal experiences that would just blow a lot out of the water, that we want to co-author a book. And then there's also something that I want to do in January, which is a roundtable discussion panel through Rise Multiversity, where we do a video panel discussion with involvement, where we can talk about what I call the love bite, dark side of Cupid, and then the twin flame issue, and then all the disruption aspects that are preventing the true twin flame union, and how the twin flame union actually, and the healing of that kind of relationship is actually a strategy towards empowerment for the human race, as well as liberation from all these forces that are acting to prevent us from awakening and becoming fully empowered human beings. So that's what I'm working on for January, and possibly a book on that if I have enough material, because I think it's a solution that we need to look at.
I think that sounds like a powerful book to write. Yeah. So I would love to be a fly on the wall. I tell you, that is really sounds wonderful, and I wish you much success on that. Do you have any last words that you would like to say about your work, or a message to people out there that are listening?
Well, this is a constant thing that I'm working on in terms of understanding and finding solutions on, I don't know what to say, on levels that heal the male and female kind of thing, because it's really the love between the male and the female in a very empowered relationship that's going to give us the power to overcome these things. So we really have to learn how to heal one another and work with one another in that sacred way to really to do a lot of healing and empowerment for the whole human race, let alone ourselves. So that's a really big issue, because that's really being attacked through a lot of these malevolent forces, is that the love itself and the love between man and woman is being highly attacked, manipulated. So.
Well, you said it like it is, and you have been a pleasure to have on my show. I hope, whenever you have another book coming out, I'd love to have you back here, because there's just so much to talk about, and it's so complex. It really sometimes takes a lot of talk, a lot of exposure about reptilians and about all the many different things that are going on to make the public aware, and also for the sake of the people who have experienced this. And I think everything that you do, people like James Bartley and all the others, it's a part of healing for the people out there that have nowhere else to go. So how can people get in touch with you, Eve? Could you tell us your websites and how to get in contact with you?
EveLorgen.com is my website, and there's a contact button where you can contact me through my website. And then both my books are available through Amazon.com, or you could contact me and go to the book menu button, and there'll be information and links there. And I also do sessions with people to help consult, coach, hypnotherapy, and clearing in different ways, and really just kind of getting an understanding on what's happening and what kind of level and how to strategize on how to deal with that. So I work with people via Skype and telephone as well. So.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I appreciate all the wonderful information you gave about your work and how you're helping people and making a difference in people's lives. Thank you. And I want to tell all the listeners out there that Skywatcher Radio has some wonderful guests coming up. And if you want to check out our website, it's www.skywatcherradio.com. And we also have a Facebook page called Skywatcher Radio Show. So those are where you can look at some of our shows that we've done in the past year. Many fascinating people, researchers like Eve that has been on my show today, and James Bartley is coming up soon. So a lot of good information out there, and I hope that everybody will join in. So thank you again, Eve. I hope you have a wonderful evening. And this is Debra Jayne East for Skywatcher Radio Show signing off. Thank you.